Hi, y'all. So the first couple minutes, I'm going to have a lot of adrenaline, be a little shaky, but we'll get through it. I know I'm between us and snack time, and I've seen the snack trays. They're pretty awesome. Just in case we don't have really good color contrast on this projector, I did put a QR code so you can actually follow along on your personal device if you prefer that. More or less should be the same, but you know, last minute tweaks by authors, what can you do? As he said, I'm the accessibility lead at HashiCorp. HashiCorp is a DevOps company, so we're kind of middleware. I still don't really know everything we do. Like, I'm still learning by auditing our UIs, but it's the really boring stuff that nobody wants to do over and over and over again at scale. So it's good that they exist, or we exist. I'm also on the ARIA working group for the W3C as an invited expert. I work on accessibility specification. I'm sorry that's so confusing. We're working on it. And I'm also on the core team for the Ember.js framework, kind of the OG JavaScript framework. You can find me on GitHub, Mel Sumner or Melanie Sumner on LinkedIn. I'm around other places except for Twitter because you shouldn't do that. So I've been working for the past couple years on the Helios design system at HashiCorp. Very cool. Like, I've been doing this for almost 27 years, writing code for the web, and this design system has been everything I always knew could exist. And I'm really excited to have been working on it. It's an open source project, so you can go see it, look at our documentation. It's super awesome. It includes everything you need to know, plus accessibility. Very awesome. And the code's open source, so you can totally steal it and make your design system awesome too. I speak a lot about accessibility. Well, not a lot, sometimes. And sometimes people like it and do pretty good at it. So if you want to see my slide decks, that's my notice profile, and that has all my talks and all my slides, and steal those too and talk about accessibility. I've also the white paper that I wrote a white paper and had it copyrighted, and this is kind of the brainchild that kind of started everything. Continuous accessibility, and that's continuousaccessibility.com. It's an evolving work in progress. I think even after writing this talk, I need to go update what I call some things, because I was like, oh, that's a better name. So there you go. So hopefully all of these are reasons that you are now convinced that I'm an expert in what I do, and you will listen to me, and you will do everything I say. Okay? Good. Okay. So what are we going to talk about? The vision. Naming things is hard. The vision kind of sounds a little bit pretentious, but hopefully you get the idea of what continuous accessibility is, how I'm defining it, how we're going to think about it and talk about it in this talk in particular, and hopefully that will help us just have shared expectations of what do I mean when I say that. Next, we're going to kind of go into the things that might distract you from all the awesome advice I'm going to give you. One of the things I've learned in giving this talk is I inevitably have someone come up to me after and say, Melanie, that was such a great talk, but I'll never be able to do that at work. I've got X blocker. So I've identified a couple of the blockers that you might have, just so your brain's not distracted from the rest of the talk, and also you feel like, oh, I'm here. Maybe you'll have some ideas based on some advice I can give you. And then we'll get into what I call the meat of the talk, the strategic implementation of continuous accessibility. How are we going to do that? What do we need to plan for? All those kind of details. And then we'll wrap it up with some expected outcomes and some action steps, because I always like you to leave at one of my talks feeling like, oh, I have something I can go do. So what is continuous accessibility? Well, I'm going to first start up with why you might want it. You might want to avoid bead suit. You might want to get more users. You might want to keep existing users. And this is the biggest thing I found in inaccessible applications. It's the same as an app. You'll find an app, you'll be really excited about it, and then when you press Control S, it doesn't do what you think it's going to do, and then you don't want to use it anymore. Like, you stop loving it. So really, it's about helping your existing users love what you already have and keep using it. So in software engineering today, we have continuous integration and we have continuous deployment. And these two things by themselves have drastically improved the lives of engineers everywhere. I was an engineer before we had these things, and it was a nightmare. Like, I know how to do a multi-server WordPress installation on Windows just because I had to learn how to do that for the job I did at that time. Who likes doing that? No, not me. I want to work on the front end. I want to work on the code for in the browser, on the front end. That's where, like, I'm passionate about that. These two things alone, I can just push my code to GitHub and it deploys to my server. How awesome is that? Like, we live in an era of magic, even though it doesn't feel like that. It feels awful right now. Sorry. But in engineering, we have so much magic that we just didn't have 15, 20 years ago. So now I'm going to give us this new idea, this idea of continuous accessibility. And for the purpose of this talk, we'll use the definition I'm working with, and that's the approach to ensuring that code intended to be displayed in browsers can be continuously checked and monitored for digital accessibility requirements through an application of existing software engineering concepts plus the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. Makes sense, right? Totally obvious, but like, we didn't do it yet, so maybe not. So start where you are, because accessibility is a journey. In this section, we're going to go into some potential blockers. But I want you to remember, they're not necessarily your blockers to solve. They might be blockers that you're facing, but when I've been really successful at removing these blockers, it's because I found a partner in another part of the business. Somebody who is willing to pair with me or advocate for me or be an executive sponsor, a design partner. Those things are really important to have as an engineer. So don't take this all on by yourself first. And accessibility really is a journey. You're going to learn, and you're going to learn more things, and then you're going to meet someone who uses a screen reader, and then you're going to say, wow, I didn't know anything at all. Let's start from the beginning. And you're going to try to use a screen reader yourself, and it's going to be awful, and you're going to have to relearn everything. It's a journey. We're always improving. So the first blocker you might run into is executives, probably. Do they understand it? Because a lot of times they haven't. They want shareholder value. You need to provide shareholder value. And the thing we don't want to have to think about as engineers is, how do I provide shareholder value? No, you give me work and I ship the feature, right? So why are you blocking me and telling me I can't do this? You won't sign my paycheck? Excuse me? So do our decision makers understand? And here's some of the expectations you are allowed to have and you can look for. And if you don't have these things, find an executive sponsor. Find someone willing to sponsor this work who understands the value. Are they vocal in their commitment about accessibility? Turns out having the CTO say, accessibility matters to us, or the CPO or somebody, and in the executive C-suite level, needs to say, accessibility matters to our company. Literally, that's all they have to say. But they need to say those words at least once. Because those words are what unlock everything else. They unlock budgets, they unlock project managers saying yes, designers saying okay. Point them to the North Star, the executive statement that says this. Do you have a company-wide accessibility statement? Is there a place on the corporate website, on the company's website, where you can go and there's a page that says, accessibility matters to us, and here's the way that we're demonstrating that. Do you have accessibility compliance reports? sometimes known as VPATs. So have your products been audited and measured for accessibility, and are those reports publicly available? And have they approved budget? Because like everything that we do in app world, it takes money. You need to pay people. You need to pay your designers. You need to pay your developers. You need to pay your auditors. All of these things cost money. So there needs to be budget to do these things. And that's typically coming from the C-suite, the approvals for that. If you don't have these things, it could be difficult to get other management on board. At HashiCorp, because we had our CTO say out loud, accessibility is important to us, we're building a design system team. That was now almost 3 years ago, and we have had the support to build what we built. Otherwise, we would have gotten pushback. Why aren't you shipping it faster? Right? Why aren't you delivering these features sooner? More, now, yesterday, 2 weeks ago, please. And we've just been able to really make that connection between, no, we made the commitment to this thing and we're doing the thing. And because of this, we have, if you go to hashicorp.com/accessibility, you will see that we have a public, company-wide, unified accessibility statement that we use for all of our products. We've got like 9 products now or something. We also have been doing accessibility conformance reports, and we are publishing those publicly as we finish them, demonstrating these are the areas where we know we fall a little bit short, and then we can use those reports to file issues and prioritize work in the backlog and all of those things that need to happen on a regular basis. You'll also notice if you visit it that we have accessibility as a section in our trust center right along privacy and security. And that is a really good, if your company hasn't figured it out yet, or if folks are really struggling, where do we put this? That's where you put it. It's just as important as the security you provide for your users. Think of how upset you would be if you found out that your bank was storing your password in plain text. You'd feel betrayed, and like accessibility, same thing. For a user that needs it, that accessibility feels exactly the same way. Your management also needs to be on board. Your engineering managers, your TPMs, your project managers, your product owners, all those kind of management folks. Are they giving you the time that you need? So what expectations can you have? Are you getting enough time to fix it because we'll fix it later never happens? If you think about all the technical debt that you've maybe experienced yourself or seen over the years, I can confidently say after 27 years, rarely do you go back and fix it later. I even have open source projects that I'm like, no, I need to work on that, and I don't even go back to them. So like, ship it right. Do you want to pay to do it once or pay to do it twice? That's a good line. It's good, like, little quip to have. Are they providing you with training opportunities? If you don't know what accessibility is or how to do it and you're interested in learning, will they pay for you to take a course? That's the kind of expectation you get to have from your management. Do they demonstrate that they're learning and upskilling themselves? That's another important, are they taking training opportunities as they're presented? That's something we get to expect. Do they say something along the lines of, have we thought about the accessibility requirements? You shouldn't have to say it every time. Other people on your team should be saying it. Your management should especially be the one saying it, especially if they consider themselves the leaders. If they're managing and leading, these are words they should say out loud, and you get to expect that from them. So maybe design needs to get on board too. And I'm going to spend a hot minute in this section because sometimes engineers have to not have designers, which is terrible, but it's the real world that we live in, right? Oh, you're front-end dev designer? Great, here, make this idea happen. So let's talk about a couple of the I'm going to talk about a little bit of the design heuristics and how they relate to accessibility. So if you have to convince a designer, you can, because the designer and the developer probably has the closest relationship of anyone who might not be on board with this, right? And you might have to do some of it too. So let's talk about that. A trained designer will tell you that they have design heuristics, a set of criteria that they're supposed to think about when they're designing a UI or a product. The thing is, heuristics for interaction design already map to accessibility concepts. They just might not realize it yet. Now, really quickly, Nelson interaction design concepts are very well known, and I made these cards for our designers at HashiCorp a long time ago. Recently, Jacob Nelson has come out and said some pretty terrible things about accessibility, so I've got to totally rework these cards, and I haven't done that yet, so please pardon me. But the design heuristic concept and the accessibility concept, they still map. Recognition rather than recall. That's a design heuristic. Make it so folks recognize the design. There's a consistency and there's standards in the design. Users can recover from errors when they make them. All of these things directly map to accessibility success criteria that we need for conformant applications. Sometimes I like to tell our teams, I don't know if we're doing this quite correctly, but if we're going to be wrong, let's all be wrong together. That way, the user isn't getting a one-off experience on one page versus a different page of our application. They're getting the consistent weird thing, and they can remember it for all the application. So if you ever are in a situation where you need to make a concession, be consistent in your wrongness. But beyond that, we have universal design principles, and these are in architecture, these are in product design, even starting into fashion design now. And we'll find, if you look through them, universal design principles. So this is like the idea of the curb cut, so a wheelchair user could get onto a sidewalk. Right? This is the idea of having maybe, they have those like canister containers now, and you can just pop it open with one hand. Useful if you only have one hand. Also useful if you're holding a baby or a cup of coffee, or in my case, a cat. Right? Really useful. Not specifically designed for me, but I benefit. It's all connected. And okay, so that's like a big brain, it's all connected, meme here. But that kind of thing aside, by understanding these things, we can start making designers our partners in accessibility success. So really quickly, so we looked at some of the cards for the design heuristic and the accessibility concept, and to the left here you'll see flexibility in use, which is a universal design principle. Simple and intuitive use maps to, I think, loosely, aesthetic and minimalist design, which maps to users can actually use it and understand it. Perceptible information, visibility of system status. Does a user know what's going on right now? Are your status messages available to users with assistive technology? Tolerance for error. Do our apps handle errors well? Do they give a meaningful error so I know how to fix it? Do you tuck an error away in one of those little toast things that like disappears and you're like, wait, what did I do wrong? I don't know. And then you can't go back and you can't repeat it and you're like, what do I do? And beyond that, a lot of designers use design tools. Figma is one that's big at our shop right now, but different tools for different folks. But most of them have accessibility plugins now. So if you were to go to and Google Figma accessibility plugins, that will take you to Figma's webpage where they have a whole list of accessibility plugins that designers can use to make their designs more accessible. So we can't check for everything, but the stuff that we can check for, the stuff that we do know about, we can prevent at least those errors. And finally, naming things is hard, right? At HashiCorp, we call this a badge. But when we went hunting, we found that other people called it other things, like a tag, a chip, a lozenge. What is a lozenge? I don't even know. A bullet? No, I'm sorry, but no. A pill, a status, something, right? So what we decided to do in our design system was decrease the gap between design and development. Our designer and our development for any given component works very closely together to develop the API for that component interface. So what we call the text for a button in Figma is the same as the code API for the component. The color, background color, background. They could name it different things, but then when they're talking to when the designer is handing off the design to the developer, they might not understand exactly how that maps. So for everyone to move faster together, we've made a commitment to naming things the same way. So in the Figma API, the component API, you have the same properties, same arguments, named the same way. And it seems like such a no-brainer, but that one decision has helped us avoid so much end result that just doesn't make sense. So, to sum up, relate existing design concepts to accessibility concepts. Encourage them to use things like plugins that will help them reach that point. And find places where you can agree on what to call things so that you've reduced that gap, the giant gap between designers and engineers. Okay, so let's dig into this. The strategic implementation of continuous accessibility. I have a 17-year-old, but since my son was small, I have said the phrase to him, be on purpose. And this is my advice in all of this as well for accessibility. You have to be on purpose. You have to choose purposefully to do the thing and to commit to getting it right. So we already have, as engineers, principles of continuous software engineering. They already exist. We can just use them. It's so convenient. They've taught us, there's 5 rules, right? Build quality in, work in small batches, let computers solve repetitive tasks so people can solve hard problems, relentlessly pursue improvement, always be making things better, build on what is, you don't need to resolve the problem, improve the solution that exists, and everyone is responsible. We all play a part in improving on this process and making this better for everyone. We have to be on purpose. And I think that at its core, there's 3 distinct parts to the planning process. We need to plan for our existing code, the code we already have. How will we improve the accessibility of that code while we're also responsible for shipping new features, right? Because we still do need to deliver business value. We need to plan for the code we're going to create tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, which is a really good book if you haven't read it yet. We have to make a plan. What are we going to do tomorrow when we get that new feature request? How are we going to proceed from there? What's our strategy? And to get people to continue giving us paychecks, we need to plan to measure our progress. We need to have some metrics. We need to think about what metrics, what can we measure, what can we show progress in, what can we provide reports about? Oh my God, executives love reports. You guys are going to love this. So let's talk about planning first for our existing code. There's some things we need to think about. How long has your code been around? Super awesome if you get to greenfield a project, but how often does that really happen? Not very often. You're probably working with legacy code. How long has it been around? When's the last time it was touched? How do you plan for dependency upgrades? What's your migration path? Especially if you need to share common code bases, like which dependency wins, who wins, like that's important to think about. And do you have a team that's more resilient and will pick up dependency upgrades faster, slower team that would never, and you have to go, why are you not upgrading? You're just upgrade. And then, what tools are you already using? How is everyone using the same tools? Can teams just use whatever tools they want to? How easy is it to give developer a new tool? Do they like it? Do they push back? Are they really set in their ways? Are you excited about it? We have to think about all these things when we have apps that scale, or even apps that just want to scale, right? It can be really tricky to update a dependency, especially if that dependency includes a breaking change. Like, that's something that requires lots of planning, coordination, and depending on the size of your code base, taking in a new version of a dependency can mean extra developer coordination. It has to be prioritized. Everyone has to agree we're going to do the breaking change. And you also have business priorities to consider. When I was a developer at JP Morgan Chase working on their internal banking platform and investment platform, we would sometimes take at least 6 months to see code changes go live because they didn't want to ship a new UI at the same time they were shipping new regulations for Europe. As an engineer, I don't keep up, As an engineer, I don't keep up with new regulations in Europe. I keep up with what's the cool new CSS thing or what's the cool hot JavaScript thing, right? So there's those kind of business priorities that end up getting in the way that you just don't think about. And we have to deliver our accessibility, like new accessibility features, in a way that our teams are excited. Okay, maybe they're not excited. Maybe they're at least willing to adopt. Like, if I can't get you excited about it, can I at least make you willing to do it? And if for the code we have now, we could wait for our users to tell us that we have an issue. Could, totally. We could wait for our audits or QA to come back and say, here's all your bugs. Sometimes we do that. Totally. Could happen. Don't recommend it, but you could do it. But what if we had automation identify a bunch of our issues for us first? I mean, we write tests to make sure our JavaScript doesn't fail. Let's write tests to make sure our accessibility is there too. And the thing that I think is cool about this is that if we put all these together, because our users are still going to tell us when things go wrong. Our automation, our audits and our QA and those kind of processes are still going to tell us what issues we have. But if we have automation in the first line of defense, if we're taking it to that step, then we're going to get a lot more confidence in what we ship. We're going to have a lot less uncertainty about what are they going to find? I don't know. Well, we do kind of know. So what about the code that we're going to write tomorrow? We're going to keep following the principles of continuous software engineering. But I want to zero in on number 3. Let computers solve repetitive tasks so people can solve hard problems. Something we can't solve for on the web is intent. What do you mean? What does a smiley face emoji mean? If you ask 10 different people what an emoji, a single emoji can mean, you'll get 10 different answers. There's an emoji now that is semi-transparent. And people will say, what does that mean? You know, it can mean I'm not being heard. It can mean I feel invisible. It means a bunch of different things. So we can't solve that. So we still need humans to say, this is what I intend. But computers can do a lot for us. They can do 30 to 50% of our accessibility issues for us in automation. They can tell us when we're wrong on that many. And that's, as someone who's kind of watched the accessibility space in engineering grow, I can tell you that's a giant number from what it used to be. It used to be like 5%. Now we've got almost 50%. So we have different kinds of code analysis we can use. We can use dynamic code analysis. We've got the Axe Core library made by DQ, and if you work in the space, you know them. They're the people that write the underlying rules for everybody, right? They take the spec and they transform that into automation. It's pretty cool. Lighthouse is built into Chrome, includes accessibility checks. You could just run that right in your browser as a browser extension. Microsoft's Accessibility Insights, I even like this one more because they give you extra tools. You could follow the tab focus around and make sure that's correct. It's got a whole checklist of things you need to manually check for. It's just a very cool browser extension, and they've got CI integrations. They've got all kinds of stuff. It's really great. And you have framework-specific libraries, so you can stick Vuex or Ember A11y testing. Both of these are built on HashiCorp, and you can just stick them right into your app while you build it. And you can use static code analysis. So right in your IDE, you can get those little red squigglies underneath your code that tell you exactly that you've done something wrong. We have it in Ember Template Lint. Other frameworks and libraries have it too. You can even get agnostic VS Code extensions now that will check this for you and tell you when you're wrong. It's so useful. And you mouse over it and it will give you a link to the documentation and tell you what you need to do instead. Very useful. And one of the really cool things about static code analysis is you've got real-time feedback. It's highly configurable, so you could write your own custom rules. How cool is that? So if you know what your intent is for your app, you can check to make sure that your other developers are making good choices. Because let's face it, we don't always make good choices. You can have automatic fixes. In Ember Template Lint, we have a fix flag. You can just run -- fix, and it will automatically fix what it knows about. And you can share those configs. So everybody working on the same code base has the same configuration for their linters. And I think that's pretty cool. And I've added a new category here. I call it anytime code analysis. Because sometimes you can't convince people to run accessibility dynamic or static when they should. I want to break your build, honestly. Like if you're an engineer and you're getting it wrong, and I know you're getting it wrong, I want to break your build. I'm sorry, I do. Because I want to help you get it right, and I want to help you learn how to get it right in the future. But we've also got end-to-end testing frameworks. So maybe you want somebody else to write all your tests for you. My husband works for an auction company. You have to have like a PhD in economics just to be on the QA team, right? It's really intense. You have to know all this theory. And some companies are like that. They have a whole team that just writes the tests for you end to end. And they have these for accessibility now, where you can do what a user would do and check accessibility rules while you're doing those end to end. We mostly likely call them integration tests. Also, GitHub Actions, pretty cool. They work in such a way that you can set them up to not run until you click the button to run them. So this allows me to I kind of like it because it allows you to kind of spot check a code base real quick. Are y'all doing the thing, or have you found a sneaky way around it? We love to find sneaky ways around it. Developers love to be sneaky. Like, oh my God, our whole job is to be sneaky, clever sneaky, right? So I want to tell you a little quick story. I was, a few years back, I was working at a big tech company, and we had in our linter a print pending flag. And this would tell our linter, basically, I'm going to run the linter, but anything that's wrong, just put it on an ignore list for now. I'll get to it later, I promise. And the intent was, I'll work these into my backlog, I'll prioritize the fixes, and I'll make it happen. Big tech co. No. Because there was no automated follow-up, it really turned into, we're just going to ignore these forever. Maybe we'll say a hackathon day, we'll do a bug smashing day, or, you know, we've all experienced those kind of environments where, like, that's the time where you get to fix the code, and for like 2 days you're really happy, and the rest of the day you have a sad face. But, like, because we didn't have any kind of automated follow-up, we didn't give you any warnings, we didn't break your build, we just tucked them away for you to deal with when you wanted to, because that was nice. But, so I got hired to work on accessibility implementations, and I was so excited because I was going to change the freaking world at this big tech company. And the process was to introduce a new rule. You had to first leave the rule off, You try to turn it on and see what bug fixes you need to do, right? And you turn it back off. Then you go in one by one, start fixing all the bugs. You got them all green, great. You shipped it. You tried to turn the rule on. There's the same bugs because new developers were shipping new features with those bugs in them. So I couldn't keep up. Like, they were shipping new features with these bugs in them faster than I could fix it, so I could never turn the rule on. And it made me really sad. Like, oh no, I'm not going to get to change the rule. What's going on? So I was so excited, and I felt myself just become really devastated. What are we going to do about this? We needed to do something different. Because if we didn't, we were going to be stuck trying to convince everyone, hey, this is the new rule. Can you please follow it before we turn it on? And fix your bugs, please, so we can turn it on. Which, I don't know if you tried that at a big tech company, but like even at a small tech company, it doesn't work. We had to do something different. So we enter the to-do state. Instead of only having the option to set a rule to warning or error or turn it off, we can now tell the linter to find all of these errors on our existing code base. We're going to turn the rule on. We're going to make to-dos. But these to-dos, after a configurable amount of time, turn into warnings. And after a configurable amount of more time, with reasonable defaults, we're going to break your build. You're going to have to stop, and you're going to have to fix these issues before you go further. And what this used to be animated, I'm sorry it's not anymore, but what this used to do, what this did for us, it allowed us to turn the new rule on while thinking about the existing code that we already have, and that has a timer on it. But it also allowed us to immediately roll out these rules for new code. They were linted immediately that same day, and developers had to fix them that same day. And it's also cool because when they have to fix the issue now, today, they're learning how to fix the issue that's in the to-do. So it's kind of a learning and reinforcement cycle. And this is not just useful for accessibility issues. This is useful for all kinds of footprints because JavaScript, there's 100 different ways to do that. So what code analysis strategy will you use? Dynamic, static, anytime? I kind of like some of all of them. Can I have all of them, please? Yes. I want the static analysis in my IDE while I write code. I want that immediate feedback. I also want the dynamic analysis. You could choose to do, every time you're on a commit, you check the whole code base. Or you only check the files that have changed. Or maybe you want to do something like anytime where you do it as a cron job. Maybe you want to run the full test suite, but only at night when nobody's working on it, or 3 a.m. when nobody's working on it. Who knows? I don't know. Developers don't really keep regular hours, but a combination of all three has really served me well, and really served the teams I've worked on that have been successful. They've served us well. And don't be afraid to be curious and open-minded and kind of experiment for what works, what combination works really well for your team. Examine it periodically and try something new. See how it works. Sometimes I will make it a point to just run the GitHub action to check the whole code base, just to find that thing that we missed somehow. Because computers, right? And you might be wondering, well, wait, it's a to-do. Couldn't they just delete the to-do folder and run it again and get brand new dates? Yeah, they could. It's just JavaScript, right? Like, we all know how to manipulate the scripts. Like, that's what we do for a living. It's about guidance, not control. I'm doing this to help them, and if they're willing to accept the guidance, if they're willing to integrate that and see how it benefits them in the long run, they'll accept the rules, they'll accept this will after X days turn into a warning, after X days turn into an error. It is possible, I know you're going to be shocked by this news, but have I got news for you? It is possible to get engineers to agree to breaking their builds. Right? I promise. But in order for folks to think that we're being successful, we need metrics. We need things we can measure and report on. I've improved X by 50% over the past 30 days, or something amazing. So if you want to raise and you want to be like super genius programmer person, the people who decide that want the metrics. And also, they're just really useful, and we're going to talk about why. So in case you haven't had to work with metrics yet, or you haven't worked with metrics in a while, quick refresher. Our metrics must be meaningful. They must be connected to the goals and strategy of the organization. Why do we want to do what we're doing? They must be controllable. If a metric that you're gathering isn't something that you can control or you can influence, it might be useful to know about, but it's not going to be useful to report on because you're never going to be able to directly influence its progress. So it has to be controllable. It should be easy to access. No one in your company should be like, oh, where are those metrics again? Oh, you don't get to see them. You're not important enough. No. Everybody internally in your company is important enough to see the metrics that are being used to track your progress on this. They must be actionable. Any metric that we collect, that we define, they must have actionable outcomes. What do I mean by that? We can use metrics to diagnose a problem. We can use metrics to improve a process or decide how we want a process to work. We can use a metric to set some goals for ourselves. We want to lower the number of bugs by X%, X number, but in, 2 quarters, whatever. It also could be used to watch for trends. What's repeatedly going wrong and how can we fix that? Metrics can help us with that. But before we get into the specific metrics that I think are useful, we're going to go into Goodhart's Law because it would be irresponsible of me not to remind us. When a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. I like to compare this to when you're not really into a video game, you're just playing it because everyone else is playing it, or you're playing it because your kid's playing it and they're telling you how awesome it is and you want to spend time with them. And you start to just look at the achievement lists and use it as a checklist, tick them off one by one. Okay, I played the game. Have you really played the game though? Nah, you just got the achievement, which they're still fun, but not the point of playing the game, right? It's the same with our metrics. When the metric itself is the target, we're not really focused on making our UI accessible for our users. So we've got to still keep that big brain, keep that high level thinking, and remember that this is about real people who are trying to really use our applications. So, first metric. This one kind of sets the scene for all the other metrics. It's like the one ring. Potential violation count. There are an infinite number of ways that any app could go poorly. We all know there's even just sometimes GitHub just doesn't run things correctly and it fails and you run it again and then it works and you're like, what? That totally happens. But for potential violation count, we can create an itemized list. We can make the unknown known. We've got WCAG success criteria. We've got location-specific legal standards. In the U.S., we have Section 508 that comes from the Americans with Disabilities Act. In the European Union, they have their own set of rules, very similar. I think they just copied each other, to be honest. And different countries around the world have these different location-specific rules on top of WCAG. You can also use audit findings to make a list of things that could go wrong. We establish this count by starting with a list. We need to make an itemized list. We need to because we need to turn ambiguity into clarity. Do you know all the ways that your application could violate accessibility success criteria? I don't even know that some days. And I've been doing this for a really long time. So that itemized list helps us, and it's going to help us in a lot of different ways. Turn ambiguity into clarity. Make the unknown known, and you'll have a confidence boost just from knowing. You might be emotionally overwhelmed because it's such a giant list, right? But you'll have a confidence in, oh, this is a solvable problem. It might be a big problem, but it's still doable. We've just made the list of all the things that could go wrong. And you might be wondering, why not just use WCAG? Because they've already got success criteria. But just by evaluating WCAG 1.3.1, which is information and relationships, and it's really the one that will cover most of your accessibility sins, like you could hit 25 different like specific potential violations that code is not related to each other in any way, shape, or form. It could be about headings, it could be about buttons and menus and lists and all these other things, and information and its relationship to what's around it. And before you think, but, oh, this is a really big list. No, I don't know. That seems like a lot of work. Well, have I got more news for you. There's an open source project called the A11y Automation Tracker at a11y-automation.dev. And it is working on, anybody can contribute to it, by the way, so hint, hint, there's a fun project you can help work on. It seeks to track all of the potential violations and whether or not linting or testing exists. So you can dive into each potential violation. You can see what's the point of failure. Does linting or testing exist? And not only that, what's a specific rule in what specific library? So this is why it's an open source project, right? Because this information is always getting changed and updated, and somebody really clever could actually probably write a script to help pull in this automatically, right? But the site also produces a JSON file that you could use in other projects. So I think it's pretty cool because it shows the existing linting rules in the libraries they're in, the existing testing rules and libraries that they're in, and even links to the relevant success criteria for that particular violation. So you can go see the documentation directly. And for ones that we haven't automated yet, it will say, oh, we think this is automatable, or we don't think this is automatable. Here's why. Maybe it's intent. But we think this is automatable. No one's just bothered to write the rule yet. So hopefully this tool is useful to somebody. And then by identifying the edges of potential violation count, we can then determine some related metrics. Violations for which we can provide automated linting, automated testing. Does it still require the developer to author a test? Because maybe it's specific to your app. Maybe it's specific to the way you've chosen to do things, and we couldn't generally define this accessibility rule, but developers could absolutely write this accessibility rule for how they do it. And then maybe we always just need to manually test it, that things go in a logical order or something like that. These measures are useful if you want to work on tooling. They can kind of give you a direction of where to go. And you can kind of use, like I improved our linting, like we had 35 linting rules and now we have 50 linting rules because of my work in Q2, something like that. So things that can be measured, things where you can demonstrate improvement, things where you can innovate in a not very crowded space. You want to work on performance, great, but that's a very crowded space. Accessibility, not so much. Lots of room for innovation there. Let's talk about some metrics related to bugs. So we've identified our potential violations, and we want to now target what are total bug count. Well, let's go for valid bug count, actually, because not every bug that QA reports is actually valid. Or, you know. We can then break them down by, was this bug found through automation? Was this bug found manually? Was it found in an audit? Either way. And we can chart, I hope, I see some light bulbs going off in the room, and I hope that folks are starting to see the way all of this starts to fit together and the way that you might get a better picture of what your application accessibility is really like. We can break bugs down by severity. So we can use the same ones that HashiCorp uses, right? We can use critical, serious, major, minor. The SLA would, for each, how fast you have to fix this bug could be determined by its severity. And the SLA really, I want to emphasize that it's just used for shared expectations. So some companies I've been at, a critical accessibility bug, you have 72 hours to fix it. Other companies will give you 10 days. But then as the bug decreases in severity or impact to the user, so if your user can't log in because your engineer decided to make the login button a div with a click handler on it, and they didn't use a button element, the user with a screen reader is not going to be able to use that, and they're not going to be able to log in. So that's going to be a critical issue. You need to fix it immediately. Just use the button. Also, just use the button. Just use the button. I'm tired of having that speech, so I'm not going to give that speech now, but just use the button. That needs to be fixed immediately, but maybe you have a main element with the role of main on it. That's considered a minor issue because really you've just made some redundant code. It's not spec conformant, so it needs to be fixed, but it's not harming anyone necessarily either. It's just inconvenient and poorly written. Then we can also count bug frequency. How often does this bug occur? Can we start seeing a pattern? Maybe you've got a design system component that you're all using and it's wrong. You're consistently wrong, great, but it's causing accessibility issues. And by fixing this one component, you're fixing like 25 accessibility bugs that are in your backlog, right? The other day I was working on a code base that was using CodeMirror for like a JSON editor for config files in the UI. And they just forgot to set the screen reader label. It's one of the properties and options offered by the third-party library. I went into the component itself, I added the option in, shipped the fix, and instantly we had like 35 bugs resolved. So sometimes you can use this bug frequency metric to look for the pattern, look for the underlying issue, and it can help non-engineers see the patterns. This is really useful. We don't have enough time as engineers to do all the things we need to do. So by having the right metrics in place, we make other people on our teams partners in our success because they can look at the numbers. A PM can look at the numbers and start to see the patterns. They're really good at that, actually. So let's use the support we have around us to be more accessible. Now, maybe you've got that one engineer who's been doing that thing that way for like 50 years and doesn't want to change. Bug frequency by developer can help you identify someone that requires additional training. You can use that as a threshold. If you produce X number of accessibility issues, we're going to automatically just send you some training. We'll just help you out, just so we all know that you know. We can also measure time to fix. How many percent of bugs are fixed within our agreed upon SLA? How many teams are asking for exceptions? Oh, they do that in Big Chicken. I was astounded. They do. They say, oh, can we have permission to never fix this accessibility issue? And sometimes PMs say yes. And you're like, no. And then you have to help them figure out how to do that, right? And you can also figure out how to incentivize the process. Maybe you want to send them to training, but maybe you want to give them a raise because they're doing a really good job. And you've watched them improve time to fix or resolve an X number of issues. And we can start to think about how to measure the potential of our applications to be accessible. Think back to automation count. How many automation checks exist? So there might be 1,000 ways that your app could be potentially non-conformant, but your overall ability to be accessible through automation might depend on how many automation rules exist. So how many automatic checks exist that could exist but don't yet? Where's there room for innovation? How many manual checks always need to be completed no matter what? Again, we can bring our product partners on board to help with planning here. They can say, oh, X number of issues always need to be checked manually. I'm going to build time for that into my estimation, into the product work planning. I know, again, it's brilliant, but obvious, but brilliant, right? But you don't really think about it until you have to think about it. Are teams receiving training? Is it working? Are product managers and engineering managers, are they informed? Do they have enough time to do the work? Are they using a design system? Would a design system benefit our folks? Can we measure that accessibility? Hint, yes. Does the documentation include accessibility information? If we put that in, does number of bugs, does that go down? There's all kinds of things we can measure to really grok the potential for accessibility in our application itself. Not just in the code or the design and the people, but all of them all together. And you could imagine all of this feeding into some kind of dashboard, reporting dashboard, where anyone in the company can very quickly and easily go get that data and look at it and evaluate it for themselves. And if you're a sighted user, a quick glance will tell you overall application health. We know how to do this, and this is something we can do. So it's important to schedule review of your metrics, because you can sit down in a room, big brain, war room planning, charts, reports, everything, big rollout, but you need to occasionally check in, like, hey, are our metrics doing the thing we meant for them to do? Do we need to adjust some thresholds or how we think about metrics? Are we seeing a deterioration rate over time? Do we want this to inform our future work? What new automation could we create? What violations happen the most? What's the root cause? Can we reduce time to fix? So, we're almost there, I promise. Whew. Sorry, it's been a long talk, but we're almost there. We're almost to snack time. So what outcomes can we expect? What action steps could we take? Hopefully you already have a big laundry list of things, and you're like, oh my God, Mel, I'm so excited about this. I'm going to totally change my app when I go home. I'll be here for your emotional support. But one of the single biggest things that I think we can not only give ourselves, but our management, is information. The information they need to support us from a business perspective. Because accessibility is a civil right. Like, we're not having that discussion. But it's also an emotional issue. And in general, emotional issues, things that are emotional, it's hard to watch someone who's blind try to use a website and not be able to and feel excluded and left out. Like, in most humans, that will cause a bad feeling. And I'm a software engineer. I don't like feelings. Take them away, please. It seems at odds with business in general, right? So I think they seem at odds with each other, but I don't think they need to be. I think we can accept this thing makes us feel bad. Okay, what are we going to do about it? We can approach it rationally and calmly, like software engineers. We can use all the tools at our disposal, the things that we know how to do and be clever about, and we can have greater confidence in the quality of our code. We can more easily deliver accessible experiences at scale because we have shared definitions. We're measuring the same things. We're approaching things with shared configurations. And we can reduce our risk of lawsuits, of people that stop loving our applications. We can help people love our applications and want to keep using them. So what action steps can you take? Use the automation that already exists. You can't solve all the problems, but you could solve some of them. At least catch the obvious ones. There are, on the A11Y automation site, there's a tools page, and it lists a bunch of different potential tools you could use if you want a browser extension, if you want CI integration, if you want framework integration. You've got a lot of options. Be proactive about accessibility. Proactive and be on purpose. There we go. Partner with a project manager and propose a plan of action. Create a proof of concept that demonstrates the possibilities of how you could make this work for everyone. That's a fun one to do. Challenge yourself to innovate. Challenge yourself to think differently and challenge other people on your team to think differently about these problems. And include it in your code reviews. Don't just let it go once you know you know. Don't just let it go because, oh, you just need to ship the feature. No. That's a bug. Fix it, please. You can even contribute to some of the open source accessibility projects that already exist. So take what's there and improve on it. If you need to convince someone and you need to look for reasons, please fund a11y.com. List a bunch of different reasons why your mega giant corporation could be less evil and fund open source accessibility work. And I want everyone to remember this. You do not require permission to create accessible code. Period. I hope this talk has helped you see that even though there might be external factors that make you feel powerless about work things, maybe you have executives and project managers, designers that don't get it, you can choose to change the way you think about accessibility in your code. You have control over the code you write and ship. Empower yourself to learn more, dig deeper, and improve the quality of your own code. Thank you.